This morning we have a panel, a very prestigious panel, on the public debt and monetary stability. I see we still have a few people taking a seat. At any rate, this panel was organized by Gordon Brady. He's a member of the executive committee of the International Atlantic Economic Society. He's also a member of the board of editors of the Atlantic Economic Journal. His day job is he's within the U.S. Congress. He's an economic advisor. He's been with the society for many, many years, and so we're very honored to have him organize this panel for us. Gordon will now introduce all of our speakers, and then the panel will begin.
Okay, thank you. This is an unbelievable honor for me to be associated with such a magnificent group of economists and politicians and academics. I have long introductions for each of them. Professor Huerta de Soto is the first speaker. And he's currently the professor of political economy at the Universidad Rey Juan Carlos in Madrid. He has a BA in economics and a PhD in economics from the Universidad Complutense de Madrid. He is a very prominent Austrian economist. He's senior fellow at the Ludwig von Mises Institute, a member of the Mont Pelerin Society, distinguished Hayek visiting fellow at the London School of Economics, and too many accolades to really go through. So we're putting the bios that were written up on the Society website. He is, perhaps he is best known, although he is known for many, many things. His masterpiece, perhaps he would agree or disagree, is Money, Credit, and Economic Cycles, 1998. He has also the 7-volume collected set of F.A. Hayek's work in Spanish. He is exceedingly well known, and he's going to talk about relevant to his presentation today is his 2012 epic paper known as An Austrian Defense of the Euro. Well, without further ado, let's welcome Professor Huerta de Soto.
Thank you very much for your nice introduction, Gordon. It is for me a great honor to open this plenary symposium following a request of Dr. Gordon Brady to defend the euro from the point of view of the Austrian School of Economics. What I will do now is to present the paper that has been distributed, and it's available in the floor with the title In Defense of the Euro, an Austrian Perspective. And a version of this paper has been very recently published by Edward Elgar in a book on public economics, precisely edited by Professor Francesco Forte. You also have several copies of the DVD of the movie that my university department has produced using the script of the paper, and which consists of a vindication of Mises and Hayek's support for a rigid monetary system like the gold standard, or at least fixed exchange rates, or at least the euro, as the only framework that is capable of limiting the power of politicians, social engineers, and pressure groups. Although, in my opinion, all the points I make in the paper are very relevant for today, and for that reason I recommend you to read it carefully. Now, for obvious reasons of time constraint, I will concentrate only on what I think are its most important ideas. So, let us begin with a little bit of history of economic thought about the Austrian School of Economics, because members of the Austrian School have felt traditionally that as long as the ideal monetary system is not achieved, many economists commit a grave error of economic theory and political praxis when they defend flexible exchange rates in a context of monetary nationalism, as if both were somehow more suited to a market economy. In contrast, Austrian economists do believe that until central banks are abolished and the classic gold standard is re-established, along with a 100% reserve requirement in banking, we must make every attempt to bring the existing monetary system closer to this ideal. This means limiting monetary nationalism as far as possible, eliminating the possibility that each country could develop its own monetary policy, and restricting inflationary policies of credit expansion as much as we can. So it is only in this context that we should interpret the position of such eminent Austrian economists as Mises and Hayek. Let us begin with Hayek. There is the remarkable analysis against monetary nationalism and flexible exchange rates, which Hayek began to develop as early as in 1937 in his book entitled Monetary Nationalism and International Stability. With respect to Ludwig von Mises, his defense of fixed exchange rates parallels his defense of the gold standard as the ideal monetary system on an international level. For instance, in 1944, in his book Omnipotent Government, Mises wrote the following, and I quote, "The gold standard did not collapse. The governments destroyed it. It was incompatible with etatism, as was free trade. The various governments went off the gold standard because they were eager to make domestic prices and wages rise above the world market level, and because they wanted to stimulate exports and to reduce imports. Stability of foreign exchange rates was, in their eyes, a mischief, not a blessing. Such is the essence of the monetary teachings of Keynes." End of quote. So, as we see, Austrian economists defend the gold standard because it limits the arbitrary decisions of politicians and authorities. It disciplines the behavior of all the agents who participate in the democratic process. It promotes moral habits of human behavior. In short, it checks lies and facilitates and spreads transparency and truth in social relationships. No more and no less. Perhaps Ludwig von Mises said it best, and I quote again, "The gold standard makes the determination of money's purchasing power independent of the changing ambitions and doctrines of political parties and pressure groups. This is not a defect of the gold standard. It is its main excellence." Now, the introduction of the euro meant the disappearance of monetary nationalism and flexible exchange rates in most of continental Europe. The different member states of the monetary union completely lost their monetary autonomy. That is, the possibility of manipulating their local currency by placing it at the service of the political needs of the moment. In this sense, the euro began to act and continues to act very much like the gold standard did in its day. Thus, we must view the euro as a clear, even if imperfect, a step toward the gold standard. Moreover, the arrival of the Great Recession of 2008 has even further revealed to everyone the disciplinary nature of the euro. For the first time, the countries of the monetary union have had to face a deep economic recession without a monetary policy autonomy. Up until the adoption of the euro, when a crisis hit, governments and central banks invariably acted in the same way. They injected all the necessary liquidity, allowed the local currency to float downward, and depreciated it, and indefinitely postponed the painful structural reforms that were needed. Now, with the euro, this irresponsible strategy has not been possible. For instance, here in Spain, in just 2.5 years, 2 consecutive governments have been literally forced to take a series of measures which, though still quite insufficient, up to now would have been labeled as politically impossible and utopian, even by the most optimistic libertarian observers. Let us review some of them. First, the Spanish Constitution has been amended to include the anti-Keynesian principle of budget stability and equilibrium. Our fellow member, the late James Buchanan, would be delighted. Second, the salaries of all public servants, including me, have been reduced by 5% first, then by 7%, and finally frozen, while their work schedule has been expanded and new hirings entirely frozen, which means a decrease of around 200,000 public servants per year. Third, the standard retirement age is being raised gradually from 65 to 67. Fourth, unemployment subsidies have been reduced by 15% from the 7th month of unemployment. Fifth, significant liberalization has occurred in the labor market, business hours, and shopping prices. Sixth, public university tuition fees have been increased. For instance, in my own university, from 1,500 euros per year to 4,500 euros per each year of a master's degree program, for instance. And seventh, co-payment of medicines have decreased by 200 million euros the monthly public expense in medicines. And what is happening in Spain has taken also place in Ireland, Portugal, let us see, Italy, and even in countries which, like Greece, until now represented the lack of any budget control. And even states like Belgium, and especially France and Holland, are now starting to be forced to reconsider the volume of their public spending and the very grounds of their welfare state. And this is all undeniably due to the new monetary framework introduced with the euro. Let us now focus on a significant way the euro is unique. We must know that abandoning the euro is much more difficult than going off the gold standard was in its days. At least in this specific sense, we must admit that the euro is better than the gold standard, and that it would have been very useful for mankind if in the 1930s the different countries involved have been obliged to stay on the gold standard, because as is the case today with the euro, any other alternative is nearly impossible to put into practice, as would affect citizens in a too damaging, painful, and obvious way. To a certain extent, it is amusing to know and to see how the legion of social engineers and interventionist politicians who designed the single currency as one more tool for use in their projects to achieve a European political union now see with despair something they never seem to have been able to predict: that the euro has ended up acting de facto as the gold standard, disciplining citizens and politicians, tying the hands of unions and pressure groups, and even questioning the welfare state. Of course, that no one can deny that the European Union chronically suffers from a number of serious economic and social problems. Nevertheless, the euro is not one of them. Rather, the opposite is true. The euro is acting as a powerful catalyst which reveals the severity of Europe's true problems and precipitates the implementation of the measures necessary to solve them. In fact, today the euro is helping spread more than ever the awareness that the European welfare state is unsustainable and needs to be substantially reformed. And even the president of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, went so far as to expressly state the following, and I quote, "The continent's social model is gone." End of quote. We should also refer to the mounting pressure for a complete European political union, which many suggest as the only solution that could enable the survival of the euro in the long term. Apart from the euro fanatics, who always defend any excuse that might justify greater power and centralism for Brussels, two groups are together in their support for political union. One group consists of the euro's enemies, who know that with this proposal they are injecting a deadly virus to the euro. The other group consists of all those who believe that only the discipline imposed by a European central government can guarantee the deficit and public debt objectives established in Maastricht. This is an erroneous belief. The very mechanism of the monetary union is enough to guarantee, just like the gold standard did, that those countries which abandon budget rigor and stability will see their solvency at risk and be forced to take urgent measures to re-equilibrate their public finances if they do not wish to default. Despite the above, the most serious problem does not lie in the threat of an impossible European political union, but in the fact that a new policy of credit expansion and even of quantitative easing by the European Central Bank is capable of aborting, at least temporarily, the disciplinary effect exerted by the euro on the economic agents of each country. Thus far, the fatal error of the European Central Bank consists of not having managed to isolate and protect Europe from the great expansion of credit orchestrated on a worldwide scale by the US Federal Reserve beginning in 2001. Over several years, in a blatant failure to comply with the Maastricht Treaty, the European Central Bank allowed the monetary supply to grow by even more than 9% per year, which far exceeds the reference value of 4.5% growth in the money supply originally set by the European Central Bank itself. Furthermore, the new money was not distributed uniformly among the countries of the monetary union, and it had a disproportionate impact on the periphery countries, which saw their monetary aggregates grow at a pace far more rapid, between 3 and 4 times more than in France and Germany. Fortunately, though in the most recent cycle, the European Central Bank has fallen short of the standards European citizens had a right to expect, and we could even call its policy a grave tragedy, the logic of the euro as a single currency has thus far prevailed, clearly exposing the errors committed and obliging everyone to return to the path of control and austerity. Of course, that the situation has changed in the last months. And now the new challenge is to cope with the current anti-deflationist paranoia. This mental illness especially affects the coalition of the enemies of the euro that I analyze with detail in my paper. However, we know that complete monetary stability, I would say 0 rate of inflation, and even a mild deflation are not a threat, but a blessing, and that the ideal framework for any economy, whenever, of course, it has its origin in a sustainable increase in exports and productivity, as is now happening following the leadership of Germany, in Spain, Portugal, and even in Greece and other European countries. Furthermore, this healthy deflation also disciplines even more politicians and unions, increases the aggregate income of the formerly expropriated by inflation creditors, and teaches everyone that the only way to competitiveness and productivity is to liberalize the economy, reducing public spending, taxes, and regulations. Currently in Europe, we do not have deflation in the sense of monetary contraction. On the contrary, the money supply is slightly growing. Currently, M3, M2 is growing between 1.5% and 2.5%. And productivity is also growing at a similar path. Both effects, of course, produce as a result a close to 0 rate of inflation. Furthermore, from the Austrian point of view, deflation is not a dangerous framework, but again, a blessing, if it is the result of an increase in productivity. And we should remember the following points. First one, that according to Austrian capital theory, it is perfectly possible to obtain substantial profits, even if turnover does not increase in a deflationary framework, if costs are reduced through capital investment, which requires, of course, additional labor to produce the new equipment. This is precisely what Hayek called the Ricardo effect. Second, the flow of demand of consumer goods is not reduced, but excited when greater quantities of them are available at lower prices with much better quality, as we have continually seen, for instance, with personal computers, iPhone, iPads, and many other goods and services. Third, deflation improves the purchasing power of creditors and compensates them from the previous expropriation they suffered during the inflation-induced bubble years. Furthermore, debtors, of course, can defend themselves through the reduced nominal market interest rates that include the corresponding negative deflation premium. So we can conclude that deflation based on productivity is a blessing. It increases real wages and welfare for everyone. And finally, the example of Japan is not relevant for Europe. Although Japan enjoyed slight deflation and almost full employment for many years, it kept a very rigid and anemic economy and did not accomplish the badly needed supply-side reforms. On the contrary, Japan tried all the old Keynesian and monetarist recipes without significant effects, apart from a huge public debt and a very disappointing growth. Furthermore, the very recent new so-called Abenomics based on tax increases and quantitative easing are going to be clearly counterproductive. By the way, if you want that I recommend you a good treatment for this malady, for this illness of the anti-deflationist paranoia, probably the best medicine would be, apart from Mises' books and Hayek's Prices and Production, Professor George Selgins, I think he's present on the floor, book entitled Less Than Zero, The Case for a Falling Price Level in a Growing Economy. And now to conclude. Just as with the gold standard in its day, today a legion of people criticize and despise the euro for what is precisely its main virtue, its capacity to discipline politicians and pressure groups. In any case, we must recognize that we stand at a historic crossroads. The euro must survive if all of Europe is to internalize and adopt as its own the traditional German monetary stability, which now in practice is the only and the essential disciplinary framework from which in the short and medium term European Union competitiveness and growth can be further stimulated. On a worldwide scale, the survival and consolidation of the euro will permit for the first time since World War II the emergence of a currency capable of effectively competing with the monopoly of the dollar as the international reserve currency, and therefore capable of disciplining the American ability to provoke additional systemic financial crises, which, like that of 2008, constantly endanger the world economic order. Just over 80 years ago, in a historical context very similar to ours, the world was torn between maintaining the gold standard and with it budget austerity, labor flexibility, and free and peaceful trade, or abandoning the gold standard and thus everywhere spreading monetary nationalism, inflationary policies, labor rigidity, and interventionism. On that occasion, economic thought ended up taking a very different direction from that favored by Mises and Hayek, and we are all familiar with the negative consequences that followed. As a result, today, well into the 21st century, incredibly, the world is still afflicted by financial instability, the lack of budget control, and political demagogy. For all these reasons, but mainly because the world economic urgently needs it, on this new occasion, Mises and Hayek deserve to finally triumph, and the euro, at least provisionally, and until it is replaced by the gold standard, deserves to survive. Thank you very much.
That was certainly an excellent, excellent paper, and right on schedule, too.